happening now. We'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 325 for April the 24th, 2024. My name is Wesley Fryer, and I am a media literacy and STEM middle school teacher here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we are just still playing with springtime with temperatures in the 40s. I'm sure that sounds so harsh to you, Dr. Neiffer. But joining me fresh from the barber with a new do and even a trimmed beard, it's Dr. Jason Neiffer, the EdTech Yoda of the North, who rumor has it will be headed to Asia. Is it Japan?
Japan, as a matter of fact. Yeah, my wife and I are taking a bucket list trip in late celebration of my 50th birthday, and we're going to hang out for a couple weeks in Japan. In fact, we just finished up our planning over the weekend, and my wife and I will be spending about a week in Tokyo, and then we're going to spend 3 to 4 days in 3 other places and then head back to Tokyo. But we're really excited. It's our first time in this part of the world. We've done a lot of European and Central American travel, so that's been a good deal of fun. But now it's time for us to explore new places. And so it's a little anxiety making, just in part because, you know, it's Tokyo's a massive city, largest city on Earth, 37 million people in the larger Tokyo area. And, but of course, a wonderful public transportation system and Google Maps, my understanding from our long research, is an extraordinary tool there. It's really, really, really pretty well done and very useful there. And we were able to book places everywhere, even though it's a busy time of year to be there. So yeah, we're pretty excited.
So ironically enough, we just visited with friends Sunday who returned from there last week and absolutely loved it. They said that for foodies, it is just a dream. They had been a little bit concerned, not knowing, if the food was going to be, what it was going to be like. But evidently there was just everything under the sun, and It was amazing, and they just couldn't stop talking about it. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I'm just like, so yeah, I'm getting pretty darn excited. Sad to be leaving work for a couple of weeks. Well, I'm sad and also not sad to be leaving work for a couple of weeks. We have a lot of really cool stuff going on right now, but nothing wrong with a little world travel to sprinkle.
All right. Well, what are we going to do this evening?
Well, I think our goal here is to go through the headlines of the last 1 or 2 weeks or so and see if we can provide some perspective for educators of all way, shape, or form, to see if there's something for the educators of the world to look at with all this tech. And I'm sure we'll pick on a lot of topics that are useful to educators of all jobs. But tonight we have some AI links. We have some AI topics to talk about. We will talk about the so-called tech correction, a lot going on there. Some security news, Google news, lots of Apple stuff going on, including an iPad event announced for May. And then we'll end our time tonight with our Geeks of the Week. And Dr. Fryer, thank you so much for doing the lion's share of links. Is there a particular topic where you'd like to start tonight?
Well, I think we probably should talk about TikTok. So big headlines are the fact that the United States Congress has passed some legislation, and it was thought to probably be lost in the Senate, but it was tacked on to the military funding bill for, Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel. And so we have a new law of the land that was signed by President Biden. This is coming to us from The Verge today. Headline: Biden signs TikTok ban bill into law, starting the clock for ByteDance to divest it. And this article includes an embed of the video response from I think it's the TikTok CEO, who is based in Singapore. But it's really, that message is directed towards the TikTok community, reassuring them that TikTok is going to be here. They're going to fight this in the courts. I haven't read a lot of conjecture yet in terms of freedom of speech. Of course, this is officially a national security issue in terms of concerns that the Chinese government is able to get the data, but also manipulate messages. And I know that when this ban was originally rumored, there were, legislators in Congress that were pointing to the fact that there was, huge outcry that TikTok had asked for. That was evidence that, TikTok can influence the voters of the United States. So what are your opinions, Dr. Neiffer? Are you surprised? Do you think it's going to withstand, judicial scrutiny? What do you think the impact is going to be here?
Well, I don't doubt that there's evidence that TikTok's existence is problematic, right? Like I don't doubt that at all. And there's enough people of enough political or different political persuasions that do have access to national security information that us common citizens do not have access to, that seem concerned about this, right? And and we elect our leaders as a democratic republic. We elect our leaders in part to analyze all that evidence for us and make policy decisions. But in absence of knowing more about that, a lot of the open criticisms of TikTok seem to be criticisms that should also be levied against all the other social media platforms. And so that's really the biggest problem I have with this. And, I do follow a number of interesting creators on TikTok. I'm not saying I'm spending an hour or anything on there every night. I do probably spend 15 minutes or so on average a day. And, it's interesting for cooking. It's interesting for kind of popular culture stuff. It's also very interesting if you have a really niche hobby, because once the algorithm figures out kind of what you're super into, it does a pretty good job of delivering you content that I think is interesting to you. There's, of course, addictive properties to that as well, which is something else we may get into talking about today. But the bottom line is it's a pretty clever app and atmosphere. I have noticed a pretty serious increase the last couple of weeks of TikTok based content. And by mean that, like corporate TikTok, talking about trust and security and all of the money they're investing in all those pieces. But, sometimes it feels like this debate isn't about TikTok. It's, TikTok's only bad because another country owns it. Otherwise, we're comfortable with it. And I'm not saying that I want the Congress to force Mark Zuckerberg to divest in Meta or Facebook or Instagram. That's not what I'm arguing at all. It's just that we probably could do a pretty good job of handling the same issue if we just broadly talk about the concerns of social media. And that's where I think this conversation gets a little ugh for me.
I will talk about more in the Geek of the Week section. I don't know if you've listened to any of Ezra Klein's 3-part series that he has on AI, but I'm getting through the second one.
So far. Really great.
Yeah, I'm listening to the second one right now, and I think I agree with the author there, with the interviewee, that the tsunami of AI content, it's here. And it is just coming, and the micro targeting and the ability to persuade and to specifically target. And we needed privacy law and privacy protections yesterday. And I don't think that focus is part of this conversation in the way that it needs to be. So I don't know. I'm not an intellectual property lawyer. I'm not a technology lawyer. I don't know what the courts are going to say. I'm going to tend to think that they're going to probably, lean to the right, since they're doing that with most of the things that the Supreme Court, hears these days. But there has been some across the aisle bipartisan, finger pointing at China, and it does seem to be sort of the whipping child, or whatever you want to say, the target that people feel like they can comfortably, beat up. And it's not going to be a U.S. company, but it's going to have, it would definitely have a sizable impact on a lot of creators. Interestingly, that podcast also talks about just the animosity that a lot of folks feel towards the platforms. But TikTok may be one that, not as much, but I think people realize these algorithms can change overnight in terms of creators and who's being amplified. And then even the existence of that. And so folks are trying to cultivate a following and trying to have multiple ways of connecting with their communities. And so, we're going to have other platforms that are going to be available. And I think that privacy data privacy is definitely one of the biggest issues that we need to continue to talk about, but it's really not part of that conversation. I don't think it was what motivated this bill, or this law.
Well, and I'd also note there's another article, I think it was in today's Vox, that talked a little bit about what this means now that Biden has signed the bill, and there will be almost certainly, if not already filed, legal challenges to this. It is an interesting difference to say that they're not forcing, at least their initial strategy isn't just to say it's banned. It's that, that divest in a year or a ban. So that gives it some time here to make that happen. This does note that a federal judge has overturned Montana's TikTok ban.
I didn't actually know that. I hadn't followed that, and we've talked about that legislation, but I don't know if we covered that in the show.
And so that certainly inspires some intrigue. But I still think a better approach here, like I would just really love it if our conversation was more or less about not the dangers of this Chinese app, but rather the dangers of data privacy issues in social media. And that's the part, this is a broad tech correction piece. Dr. Fryer and I have been talking about the so-called tech direction since about 2017. So we're 7 years into this discussion at this point. And I obviously a lot has changed since then, but in some ways it really hasn't at all, because we're still not coming to terms with the basic issues that social media introduces. And again, we're not negative Nancy's about this, nor are we negative Neds for that matter. And we, but there has to be a more nuanced conversation than free speech, good, bad, right? And that's where I think this debate just really disappoints me, is that we could be having a really, important conversation here, and we're choosing not to.
An article that I put under this that is not a new article, but it is one that I came across in, doing some research and reading about this, and this is probably one of the podcasts that I listened to actually, is from Reuters back in September of 2023. And the headline is "China Bans Government Officials from Using iPhones for Work," Wall Street Journal reports. Now, in addition to this, there's a large number of apps that have been banned and blocked in China. And I don't have it. My phone is my camera, so I can't really open up my Pocket Cast. But there's a fantastic series on China that I've been listening to. I think, I got it, the recommendation from the War College, Angry Planet. Angry Planet is absolutely one of my favorite podcasts. And it's a deep dive from a former bureau chief from Beijing for the New York Times. And one of the episodes that she has, in fact, I'll find it, I'll put it in as another Geek of the Week, is about Apple and the relationship that Apple has had with China in terms of its chips and its iPhone production. It's iPhone production, really, but then also, the shifts that China has made in terms of banning content and prohibiting content. And I really, in addition to privacy, I think we really do need to talk about, media platforms. A lot of the polarization that we see today in society, I think, is directly attributable not only to the way in which the platforms are architected for attention. I read a hashtag rage bait, that these may be rage bait, posts and just things that are going to rile people up and get them upset. But it also has to do with the ways in which media companies are not required, as they were at some point in our history, to make even a vague attempt at balance. And so I think that part of the conversation is important, but it just seems like we're so fractured and polluted and all over the place with respect to media that reining that in, it seems like an overwhelming challenge. But I had not realized that the Chinese government had issued that prohibition. It reminds me a little bit of Microsoft. At some point I think Microsoft wasn't letting employees have iPhones, and then they've changed that. And that's a different, kind of different thing. But it's the algorithms have a real impact, a real influence. Just listen to an influencer who is going to rant about, a change that YouTube just made, or TikTok or Facebook or something like that. And when suddenly their content is no longer, being amplified. In fact, I've realized that as I share YouTube links on Facebook, like that's not something that is being amplified by Facebook. Facebook would really like me to put videos on Facebook, and then those videos, would be amplified. I have a friend who has had like over 1 million views on some of her cooking videos and things. We had an interesting discussion about that. So anyway, it's multi-layered. It is obviously filled with politics. It's difficult to sort, where we think the truth lies. But I will say that I didn't think we were going to get to this point with a ban. I am surprised.
Yeah.
And so it's, and I think a lot of people were. It was only because it was put with this other legislation for military funding that this thing went through. And so anyway, maybe we'll read more about that in the weeks to come, as far as what Congress folks were responsible for doing that, because I really thought our Congress was incapable of passing meaningful legislation when it came to technology. I
think you have appropriately placed cynicism, Dr. Fryer, about that particular issue. It's been a while since our Congress, really under both parties, has been all that productive at doing the people's business. But yeah, big issue. And I will say too that I know that this kind of stuff is a little harder to have open conversations about in a classroom, but please debate this with your students, right? Like, this is, they have a vested interest in this for sure. And if they are TikTok users, they may also not think about the bigger picture, right? And I think having these discussions openly in classrooms is really important. And also, it's not, well, actually, I don't know what like the bigger picture is here, right? This is hard to say, to be really honest. Like, maybe it is in part because a lot of younger people get their news from this, or maybe that makes it more dangerous or less dangerous, or there's just a lot of perspectives here. But I think this is a good way to engage your students in these conversations, and especially if they're about to start voting, then now's the time to engage them in very real issues that impact their lives.
And it's so key that we talk about freedom of speech in the Constitution and what the Constitution does and does not do, because there are some big myths that people have, that people can say anything they want and there's no restriction for that, and also that the Constitution guarantees it. And the Constitution has a prohibition against what the government can do, which in this case, if the government is going to ban TikTok, that's the government having a curtailment on freedom of speech. And so there's going to be some constitutional discussions about that. But I think that we've mentioned this, before, over and over. Maybe this is a dead horse that people are tired of listening to, but it really is important from a civic standpoint that we help educate our students about the law, about free speech, and about its limits, and, what it does and it doesn't do, to the degree that, civics education and K-12 education can help impact the opinions of the population. But I think, possibly this can be, it's going to be instructive, and it's going to have a lot of young people's attention, because there are so many folks on TikTok, and we'll see, what is that court case going to look like? It will be ironic. And this is something that TikTok CEO says, basically, that it's ironic that this China-owned company is going to be arguing for free speech under the U.S. Constitution, and so I doubt that is going to be back in the news waves, the airwaves of the Chinese people, the way that perhaps it should. But there's some irony there. But it's going to be a very solid conversation. So totally agree that we need to talk to students about this. Where would you like to go next? Let's do a little more before we jump into the AI rabbit hole.
Yeah, this is kind of picking up an issue we talked about last week, but we're starting to really see a substantive debate about the potential of banning phones in schools. And so this is a follow-up of our discussion last week about this. Vox reports, and you're starting to see some articles that kind of question the evidence that Jonathan Haidt is presenting as part of his book, The Anxious Generation. That seems a little, it's not suspect. as much as it is, I think it's open for debate. I think there's pretty extraordinary evidence that social media has an impact on kids, and it's not, or I should say, device use has an impact on kids. And that one of the things he talked about when he was on Hard Fork was the amount of evidence that he's been collecting over time. You can go to his website and see all the studies he's quoting, and you can dig down pretty deep into it. I have seen some real I guess, problematic criticisms to say, well, this one study says this, so that's obviously not true. It's like, well, that's not how studies work, right? One study doesn't counter 100 studies, but also 100 studies can also be wrong too, because that's research is an ongoing a piece that requires maintenance and tending. But I do think that his argument is much more nuanced than that, in that it's not just about cell phones, it's also about the social constructs that exist for students under the age of 18, or I should say kids under the age of 18, and that it's a more of an argument than just cell phones and tablets and computers. I don't think the moral panic about screen time is really all that useful of a construct. I do think it's interesting, however, that if we have other evidence to suggest that play and association trends amongst our adolescents and teens is being impacted by the devices, that's a way different argument than just say staring at a screen is bad, right? And so that's a different piece of this. But that article certainly helps stir the pot on this topic. But I'm pairing that this week with an article from the Wall Street Journal that I think is an interesting sub-debate here. And this article talks about that that as schools wrestle with the topic of whether or not they should ban phones, they're finding a pretty strong counter advocacy from a lot of parents. And we do have a larger assumption than we've had in generations past, that a student or the parent is going to be able to find their kid 24/7, know where they're at, get a message to those students, in real time, and be able to communicate with them wherever, or whatever the situation may be, whether it's truly emergency or not. And that's complicated, right? I mean, especially in 2024, with the amount of intrigue that exists around schools in general, I think this is something we're going to have to really discuss, throughout the community, in and out of schools, and go from there. So any thoughts, Dr. Fryer?
This is my 9th year to be in private schools. I did attend some private schools in 4th and 5th grade. We lived in Mississippi the rest of my time as a student in K-12, as well as a public school, an educator has been in public schools. I think you're absolutely right that parents are a huge influence, and we see this. We saw this in Oklahoma. We see this here in terms of the parental expectation, whether it's a smartwatch or it's a phone. They not all parents, but there's a number that do really believe that they need to have constant access to their students. However, there's also, I think, an acknowledgement that they are phones intrusive in the classroom, and they need to have their proper place. I think that it's interesting because here's the two authorities here are either parents or the school, and the school, actually both. And like what Haidt is mainly saying, I think, I mean, he's really pushing for parents to not get phones for their kids before 8th grade. And he's talking about the evidence that if most of the kids do have them, and then you tell your kids they can't, then you're really putting it's creating problems for your children, because they're not going to be with their peers, knowledgeable about those same things, etc. I think I mentioned on the show there's a movement called Wait Till 8 or Wait Till 8th or something like that. And we had heard about that from parents when I was in Oklahoma, who were trying to do that and have a groundswell, so that there would be a lot of parents, not just a few, that were going to just wait until 8th grade until their students got phones. I also think that we ought to be teaching classes for students in high school to talk about these issues. I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and maybe about half to a third of my kids don't have phones. A lot of them do, but many of them don't. And it's quite different when everyone does have a phone in high school. So I like to see the debate, looking at the research, looking at what is said. I think that there is just this broad consensus that cell phones have had and continue to have a big impact, not only upon students, but upon adults, but on our entire society. And I think a lot of us feel rather powerless to be able to do anything about that. So I think it's important to take a look at this research, to take a look at the arguments, continue to make decisions for yourself as far as your own parents. If you're a grandparent, who caring for children, there's all sorts of complications because of custody and blended families and things like that, and who set up the phone and who has the parental controls and all kinds of things. And I think that, amidst all of this, I don't hear the conversation really about filtering and about, access, the ways in which the internet has marched on, and we're still, basically handing phones to kids and then pretending like, oh, it'll be fine. They won't get into any trouble or have any problems with that in some cases. So really got to keep having these conversations and keep checking in with kids, because no matter what the policies are on the phone, no matter what kinds of filtering they have in one location or another, I don't think there's any substitute for open communication and trying to have, dialogue about, what we're doing and the amount of time we're spending, and all of those kinds of choices, because it is a complex web of issues. It is not just simply, hey, TikTok got banned, we're good now. So.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I'll even take that a step further too, to say that, it's not like Wes and I are anti-phone in the classroom. That's not the point at all. In fact, the bottom line is that, a digital device in a student's hands is an extremely powerful and profound tool. It's just that you have to really think about their use and assert your instructional authority in the classroom of when they're out and where they're not. And as we're starting to debate AI in the broader context of the world and education, like, one of the things I am really worried about is that we're going to make the same mistakes that we've made in the last 20 years in regards to the internet and personal devices. Is that, we vastly under invested in professional development, and we were really leery to allow devices into classrooms for legitimate instructional purposes. And then there was a point of which I'm not sure if I can pinpoint it, but sometime in the last 10 years where resistance to that went down, but it wasn't accompanied by thoughtful implementation of those devices in the classroom. And I'm now pretty concerned that we're going to do the same thing now in AI, and that those technologies are moving extremely quickly. It's going to make the internet seem like it was a slow adoption, for sure, and yet we aren't having those critical conversations yet. And I am still surprised the number of people I talk to that are otherwise pretty darn tech savvy that kind of shrug and say, I haven't played around with it much yet. And I get it, just because of all the that is going on right now in the world, and everything that's required of teachers and classrooms and all those pieces, all true. But at the same time, wow, I think it really does create an existential crisis if we're not super thoughtful about what's next.
Absolutely, and we will talk more about AI as well as do some of that in our Geek of the Week section too. So. You ready to jump into that? It is 9:30 or half past.
Yeah, I don't know where that half an hour went, but I suppose if you just wind you and I up on a topic, we're good to go for quite some time. Let's go ahead and jump into AI. And if you don't mind, Wes, there's a couple of releases I want to point out because they're really great ones. Two, what I would call kind of B tier AI models were released in the last week. And when I mean released, I don't just mean they're available, because a lot of models are available, just unless you do something fancy, there's nothing to do with it, right? You have to set it up or host it on a website or download one of the container systems like Studio or Elm Studio that allows you to host it locally. But one of them is a Llama 3 from Meta, and that is Facebook's, Mark Zuckerberg's open source model. Its third edition is out, and Mistral, which is a French company, has also released a new set of tools online. But these are now websites you can go to and use both of these tools, like you can ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, Google Bard, or I'm sorry, Google Gemini, etc. So Meta AI, if you just go to meta.ai, it's you don't need to log in, which is the trend where things have been going as of late. You don't need to log in anymore with these tools to get access to them. So
well, sometimes there's consequences, because I think, didn't OpenAI say we'll keep your data if you don't log in?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, yeah. Or if you're not paying for it, may do other things with your data, and yeah, that's absolutely true. But you can do all of the text-based chatting you want to with Meta AI without even logging in. And then the other one I want to point out is,
which, by the way, was something a lot of schools were concerned about. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Kids are going to use this, but they don't have the right to do it, and whatever. And yeah, now we don't have to log in, so that's
yeah. And and I'm not that I'm entertained by this, because I'm not. I'm very concerned. But it was interesting in the early days that we were, and by early days I mean 18 months ago, but we were leaning very much on the terms of service of these. That, well, you can't use this with little kids because the term of service says you can't. Well, if a kid has a device, and the last half an hour of discussion suggested that a lot of younger kids may have devices, then you can go to ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or Meta AI and do that. The other model that was released in a more familiar format was Mistral AI, which is a French company that releases that particular piece, and it kind of has a lot of ChatGPT-esque functionality, in that you create an account for free, you get access to what they call Le Chat, which is pretty great that Le Chat exists. It is built on open source as well, but now you can use it directly on the web, and which is really cool to be able to do that. And I would also note that Mistral is pretty great from the standpoint of it plugs into GLASP, and I've not talked about GLASP in a while. This was an early tool that we talked about in 2023, but GLASP is a super cool Chrome plugin that you have to tweak it a little bit to get the full functionality, but once you do, it pops a button up on YouTube and also on any web page with text on it, and will offer to copy and paste either the YouTube transcript or the text of a document or a web page, open it up in a new window, sending it off to Claude or ChatGPT. And now Mistral is a service that where GLASP is useful, and then it summarizes it for you, so that it's a way to process a video very quickly to find out if it's worth your time, or to get a summary from it. And I think that's really pretty darn cool. And in fact, that's for me still very much the killer application in this world of generative AI, is the ability to really efficiently research. No one wants to scrub through 2 hours of a YouTube video to find a piece that you're looking, or to find if it even contains a piece that you're looking for. So I think that's pretty darn important. And then last week I shared a tool that allows you to test and rank generative AI tools. It currently shows Claude 3 and GPT-4 in 2 different versions, tied for first. Gemini is next up. Meta Llama 3, so the one I was just talking about, is 6th place. But if you scroll down a bit, Mistral is in the top 10. And so, this is a good model based on open source, that they're allowing you to use a lot of the core functionality for free. And I've experimented a little bit with Mistral this week, and it's pretty darn good.
What is that website again that has the ranks?
It is called, well, here, I'll put it in chat. It's LMSys. And they have something called the Chatbot Arena, where you can you do a
head-to-head
search, and it does in 2 models at once, and then you vote on which one's the better model.
Okay. Something that just occurred to me, back to our discussion about TikTok. Isn't this what I haven't read this anywhere, but I wonder if the US government, because training data is so critical for these models, they've got to be fed more information. And I've probably said on the show in the past, whoever at ByteDance in China or wherever came up with TikTok and this model was an absolute genius in terms of recognizing that, hey, we can make this curated, platform that will encourage millions of people to not only watch all this content, but to upload all this content, give us all this data, and we'll be able to use that to feed our models. And so, in a very real sense, because we're having these different lawsuits and discussions about. It's fascinating. Like, will synthetic data created by AI, be good enough, and what result will that have when it's used as training data, and when do we need the humans? And anyway, but
Yeah.
I hadn't made that connection to think that, well, maybe we're trying to stick it to China as a country to say, no, we're going to stop, we're going to turn off the faucet and not let you have access to the U.S. Population as they feed Chinese AI models that have to have data. So anyway,
And just to give you an example of comparing these models, I just did run a question through the LMSys arena. And the question was, what is the EdTech Situation Room? And the first one says, the EdTech Situation Room, or EdSit Room, is a fascinating initiative that brings together experts, researchers, and practitioners to practice pressing issues in educational technology, which is not what the EdTech Situation Room is. The other model said the EdTech Situation Room is a podcast that features discussions about the latest trends, news, and updates in the world of educational technology, hosted by educators and technology experts, Dr. Fryer, according to this random chatbot. The show typically explores how technology is shaping and influencing education across various levels, from K-12 to higher ed. And I'm going to say that the
which model was which? What was the second?
Well, that's I'm going to vote here, and it's going to tell me. So I'm going to say that one's better because it actually figured it out. That's ChatGPT 4. The one that nailed it was ChatGPT 4. The other one was Llama 3 from Meta. So my apologies, Mr. Zuckerberg.
Hallucination.
But you couldn't figure us out. So I
apologize. What a great tool. Also thinking about demos and things like that. I'm thinking more about EdTech or AI play dates. And I think I'm going to get some of those just going on a regular basis, because there's a lot of things we don't know, folks. But things we do know is we got to be using these tools. We got to be playing with them. And we got to be telling stories and talking about them. So that looks like a fantastic tool. I went ahead and dropped that into the chat.
Awesome.
Wow. Let's see. You want to talk about the Microsoft thing? Did you see the Mona Lisa thing? I do not show this to your students, folks. If you're oh gosh.
Go ahead. Let's go there.
Do we want to go there? Well, that was one where I was like, do we even want to go there? But
I mean, I would say
well, let me go there first with an article about the law. So we had some discussion. This is Ars Technica today. Deepfakes in the courtroom. U.S. judicial panel debates new AI evidence rules. And I think this is absolutely fascinating, because you've got a presentation by the computer science experts and the AI experts for judges and lawyers and folks in the legal profession. There's a panel of 8 judges, and they are wrestling with whether or not we need to have some changes in the law because of deepfakes and the potential for video content to be completely fabricated. And there was one judge saying, I really don't think we've seen that much. Is this really a problem? And I don't know. And I have this sense, and of course I'm listening to podcasts about this, that paint this picture, that it's the exaflood, it's the tsunami. We are we should be bracing for this AI flood. One of the podcasts, maybe it's that second Ezra Klein one, says, Amazon has responded by saying you can only upload 3 books a day. Well, if you're a human, you're not writing 3 books a day. That's a ridiculous response to this. But the flood of content being created by AI is here, and it's just going to get worse. So they did not decide yet conclusively that there have been no definitive changes to the law. I'm glad they're talking about this. And unfortunately, I mean, we need to be taking some proactive steps, because I think it is incontrovertible. It is happening right now, and this tsunami is coming. But on the same sort of theme of video-based AI creations, Microsoft announced this VASA 1 AI model, and I think that was your article from
Yes.
Tom's Guide. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this caused a quite a blip in discussion last week, and it's very well related to Dr. Fryer's article regarding things about evidence. But what is absolutely true is that there are tools that exist right now that are dirt easy to use, right? That don't require a whole lot of savvy or technical expertise to pull off. That can create fake video or fake lots of things, right? Can conjure up things out of nowhere. And last week, Microsoft demoed a tool that's called VASA, VASA 1. And it's an AI model that the Microsoft has that can take a single photograph. So we're not talking about a series of photographs, right? If you've been playing with AI the last 2 years, that a lot of the apps that will generate generated headshots for you, or you in the 1950s or you in the 1800s, those oftentimes require 15, 20, 30 photos of you from different angles to create a realistic image. This does not require that at all. Single photograph. And then it can create a realistic animated video of a talking head of that picture, showcasing an extraordinary, natural-looking lip syncing and head movements. And Microsoft was clear to say last week during their discussion on this that it's not publicly available. And I've also read somewhere, and I don't think it's in this article, that they've also been very clear that they don't want this to be a factor in the 2024 election. So that's why they're delaying this. Like the 2025, 26, 27, 28 elections aren't of concern. But to your point earlier, Wes, one of the reasons why things are going to get complicated here is that there's really no barrier to entry once these models are released widely and publicly to creating a whole bunch of AI content. So even if there's a means of detecting it, of which there probably is going to be some better tools that help us know that. The bottom line is, if we create so much true and false media that there's going to be so much to sift through, the truth could get very easily buried. And we haven't spent enough time in the last say 20 years really working on media literacy. That's a drum that Dr. Fryer beats on quite frequently for an excellent reason, but that job just became infinitely more complicated.
Yes indeed. So it's and because these tools are open sourced, the open source, a lot of these tools in some respects are not great. Okay, maybe they're C-, they're C+, but all these are going to be A+++ models in due time. And while possibly Microsoft is going to stop this from being available to the general public before the 2024 elections, the tsunami that's coming and the tools that are going to be in people's hands, I think there's an inevitability to that. And I don't foresee there to be any kind of legislation that can be passed that is going to change that. Now, that's not to say I don't think we should look seriously at regulation, and we need to look at privacy and things like that. But wow. The demos here are just crazy. I'm not going to go to that next article, but they're just crazy. Okay, just one picture. And honestly, it makes me question. I have a whole lot of photos. I have 55,000 some pictures on Flickr. Simply having your picture out there, but and who's going to be able to stop your picture from being taken and put on the internet? But anyway, it's a crazy world. And we're going to see this in schools. We're going to see these kinds of things done in schools. We already have had a little bit of a blip of one, but just like sexting has been a big thing that's touched every single high school in America, I think we're going to see this affect schools in the same way. And So,
Well, and remember, it's not just about the complexities of all the fake stuff, but it also means that if someone is truly engaged in poor behavior that's recorded in our cell phone heavy culture where thousands of cameras can be pulled out in seconds in large events where bad things happen, then it's going to be too easy for people to say, well, no, that's an AI generated, right? That's not real, that's AI generated. Or if we enhance this stuff, then it's going to be AI that's no, that was AI enhanced. And yeah, I have hope that we can get this figured out, but there's certainly a lot of complexities.
I think you have a Wired article for the same one I did from Ars Technica. Let's chat about this. This was April 18th. Author granted copyright over book with AI generated text with a twist. This is absolutely fascinating. I think that the idea of using AI as a brainstorming partner, as a co-writer, even certainly as an editor, like all of those things are incredibly powerful. And if you have not used this, especially when you feed it, the more information that you feed it, the better it can respond to you. And I'll talk about this in the Geek of the Week, but one of the best practices is really drawing things out in multiple steps. It literally gives the models time to think, because if they're not responding to you, they're not churning through data. They don't just sit there and think. So this is a report about the Copyright Office changing their course. They had originally said, no, there's no way you can copyright anything that is copyrighted. And the author of this article, actually, I think you got the original because this came from Wired and Ars Technica republished it, I think. But this is an Army veteran, Elisa Shoup, 60-year-old retired vet that used ChatGPT extensively while writing a book. And part of what becomes, unique about this is that because of some disabilities, the plaintiff, Shoup, is saying, that this is like assistive technology, that it would have been impossible to write this book without the assistance and help of AI. And so what the Copyright Office granted was not the full copyright over the entire book. It doesn't recognize her as the author of the whole text, which is conventionally what it does. Instead, quote, she is considered the author of the selection, coordination, and arrangement of text generated by artificial intelligence, which is a very nuanced thing. So somebody else could go in there, reorder the sentences, and then copyright that. I don't know. I think this is a fascinating discussion, and I got to get on the stick with some book writing that's long overdue, and I fully plan to use AI. It's interesting, right? Because if I'm going to fully attribute what I'm doing to the best I can, because I think that's what we need to do as academics and scholars. But like here, there's like a penalty from the Copyright Office. So if you're honest and you admit to use AI, well, we won't give you your full copyright. I think that AI is an assistive tool, just like Grammarly or spell check. It's vastly more powerful. Okay. I don't mean to understate it, but I'm saying, like, people don't say, oh, you use spell check, so we're not going to allow you to say that's your work because you were helped by that. And I think that AI is vastly more powerful, but the difficulty that the Copyright Office is having grappling with this is perhaps, a real sign of the times of the difficulties that many people are, if not having now, they're going to be having soon, grappling with this. So what are your thoughts about it? Because I think you put the Wired version of that same article in.
Yeah. So super interesting for sure, right? And I'm a nerd, so I like topics like copyright law, because I do think that a copyright law has escaped the intent over the last 100 years for sure, right? And I've heard some people refer to this as the Disneyfication, which is apparently a hard word to say, of copyright law to gather very extended protections for creators. And I don't have a particular horse in this race. I don't own copyrights of anything meaningful, so for me, it's an interesting academic discussion. But I'm not entirely sure that the original stance of no AI generated content or machine generated content could be copyrighted means all that much when you start to drill down on the tool sets that we already use, right? Even before the AI piece, Grammarly did a pretty good job of fixing grammar and cleaning up writing. Spell check goes back, nearly 40 years, right? And I recall that there were a lot of hand wringing that spell check is a tool that encourages lazy writing, and that there's no way for us to really teach spelling anymore because students will be relying on this instead. And let me be clear, I'm a terrible speller, so maybe I advance a little bit because of that too. But I just think there's a lot of nuances here that we're probably going to have to spend a lot of time thinking about. What is creation, and especially the kind of work we're talking about here in this particular article. I don't see the harm in granting that, because I think the argument about it in system technology is correct. But also, if they're not, and I don't know how you guarantee this, but if you're not you kind of pulling the wool over people's eyes, right, with it, you're not using it to pull a fast one or to rewrite someone else's work to claim it as your own. It feels like this is a way to get other people's thoughts and arguments out there into the open. So again, we have a lot to do before this makes any sense at all, but it's certainly a fascinating twist.
We don't need to create disincentives for academic honesty and attribution. And unfortunately, I think that could be an outcome of this ruling. And when we think about the policies that we're going to adopt in schools too, we need to reward rather than punish academic honesty. And that includes full attribution for AI use. So I think that's an important little footnote to that one.
Yeah, that's a great argument, by the way, Dr. Fryer. So you win the round.
All right. Let's see. Well, we want to do a couple more AI ones, or want to pick up a couple more things before we Geek of the Weekend? We got about 10 minutes.
Yeah, let me, this article kind of blew me away a little bit. This is from the Register, and their argument is, or the headlines, OpenAI's GPT-4 can exploit real vulnerabilities by reading security advisories. And the Register is really good at coming up with dark technology scenarios. And I'm not saying take this a grain with salt, but, it is part of their shtick to be able to think about that. But they cite researchers from the University of Illinois that have discovered that the GPT-4 large language model can be set to autonomously exploit real-world security vulnerabilities by reading security advisories and developing what's sometimes referred to as zero-day or day one exploits on the fly. So, in other words, there's a lot of holes in all software, right? That's an established piece that goes back 50 years. So, the commercial software that you're using right now, whether it's Chrome, the browser, or an operating system, or really anything that is flashing on your screen is in some way software based. Well, the reason why you get updates frequently and why you should always accept updates, generally speaking, of your operating system is because it fixes security holes, right? Well, basically what this argument says is that these researchers were able to build a bot that was constantly surfing a software manufacturer security pages when they, which is a good security practice, noted the exploits. And not just that they're searching for the exploits, because that's something that humans do. Hackers do this all the time in order to determine their strategies, but instead could autonomously do this themselves. So in other words, because these bots can code, they can be set up to where they see an article from Microsoft, Apple. It's not about an individual software manufacturer. It's about any of them. They see the exploit. They create a bit of code around that, and then could deploy it in real time. So before anyone else even knows, there might be, extraordinary hacks. And in this era of heightened concerns about cybersecurity, especially in a world where we just don't invest enough of that, and I'm thinking in particular about schools, that's just a real sci-fi that this is suggesting.
Well, on that note, I'll cover the security article that I put in there from Ars Technica today, which headlines Nation-state hackers exploit Cisco firewall 0 days to backdoor government networks. And this feels like, a sort of obligatory weekly public service announcement we're going to have to say, folks, the nation states that are trying to harm the United States are already inside the house. And so this just confirms that these hacks, which target the Cisco ASA firewall and then other perimeter security appliances, have been compromised. And the sophistication of the hack indicates that this was a nation state, not a smaller group doing that. It also says that there were other vulnerabilities which would account for the way in which the hackers were able to gain this access. And there's a lot of very arcane, details in this article. But the gist of it is that, we have a large number of bad actors who are inside critical infrastructure, companies, government websites, all kinds of things. And so as the world continues to be a hostile place, we have actual kinetic wars as well as cyber wars that are being promulgated in different parts of the world. Do not be surprised as you see cyber attacks have debilitating impacts on critical infrastructure, possibly on just a regional basis, but maybe on a more widespread basis. This stuff is not tinfoil hat crazy. It is happening. And, and we need to do the things that we can to protect ourselves, to protect our organizations. Just absolutely vital if you're in any kind of administrative role or technology role that you have a very firm plan of how you're going to handle a cyber attack, how your data is backed up, that you have tested that. You can spend an unlimited amount of money on, pen or penetration testing and on, trying to prepare. But if you don't feel confident in your security team and your technology team responding to a ransomware attack, a dramatic cyber attack, make that your agenda item number one for your next meeting tomorrow.
Yep. Here.
All right. Well, we have almost talked for an hour. Do you want to say anything about the Apple event? Pencil us in, I think.
I think it is. And it's very clearly some kind of Apple Pencil in the image. And Tim Cook tweeted about it. So it's a whole thing for sure. But the date is May 7th. It's very clearly about iPads. At least that's what everyone is talking about. There are a lot of rumors what this could be, including a new Apple Pencil feature that allows it to be found on the Find My network, which would be really great because I've already lost 2 Apple Pencils. And in fact, now use a super duper generic one that cost me $9 because I'm not I don't use an Apple Pencil the way a gifted artist might use an Apple Pencil. I use it to scribble and amuse myself. But super great. There's also some sort of squeeze gesture that might show up. Magnetically swappable tips that simulate different kinds of writing and drawing instruments, which is super cool. So yeah, likely coming to an Apple store near you. And I would say that I have a couple iPads right now that I absolutely love. In fact, it's probably going to be my primary computer while I'm in Japan. I haven't decided if that's the way I'm going to go yet. But super excited because I still think the iPad is a pretty amazing piece of hardware.
I'll drop this one in too. This is Mac Rumors from today, and this is that Apple has released 4 different open source large language models which run on device. And so in amidst lots of rumors about events and things like that, of course, Apple has not entered in a big way into the artificial intelligence large language model world, and we anticipate them doing that, but also doing that in a way that is on device for privacy reasons. And so the Apple release of these open source AI models that run on devices. Not a surprise, and perhaps we're going to hear more about that at the May event.
And I would also note that I have seen some rumblings too that suggest that Apple has been extremely careful about training data. And so one of the ways that Apple might be able to propel itself into a more critical position in AI is if instead of, if other models end up having to start over again or get legally limited because of copyright issues, if Apple's started off quietly doing this right and have no issues with that, that could be a real way that Apple could enter into the league.
And using our data, right? I mean, I love the fact that Apple is creating different memories. I wish on Apple TV that I could affect those, because in some cases I'm like, I don't really want that picture. Here, let's skip that. And to my knowledge, you can't really change that. It just, if you have memories selected as your screensaver, it just is automatically doing this stuff. But the fact that, yes, I've got all these photos in iCloud and Apple can do things with it. Google does as well. But lately it's just gotten better and better. And it's truly brought me some joy to see some pictures put together in little videos, and that kind of stuff I think is definitely a real positive for this. And so I'm of course an Apple fanboy and excited to see what they're going to announce. But I mean, that kind of stuff is joy giving, positive. And I think that you're right. Apple is it has an eye to the legality of all this. And so it's going to be super interesting to see how they approach it. It's also going to be great to see the movie. I generally like to, at least take the opening movie of whatever their event is. And I share that with kids. We talk about it because there's always some cool stuff to talk about. Not, the least of which is just some amazing cinematography and digital storytelling. So. Okay, sir. I think we should geek of the week it.
Well, as I tend to when I'm about to travel, I've been spending a lot of time the last couple of days thinking about my tech and how my tech is going to work. And I will be working on my vacation, but have to check in on a couple of work items, so I'll have some tech with me. But I have discovered the delights of an eSIM while internationally traveling, and especially if your phone is not locked. Which is a whole deeper conversation that is much more extended than the 30 seconds I'm going to spend it here. You can add a secondary SIM to modern phones and just turn your US SIM off and turn your target country one on. I found one that was really well recommended from a company called Mobile that's going to cost me roughly $31 for 50 gigs of data. For 3 weeks while I'm in Japan. And so I won't have to worry about that. That's plenty of data for me. I can tether my laptop to it if I want to, and use the data there. I'm also a T-Mobile customer, which does have free international data, but limited. So once it's through, I think it's 5 gigs or something, then it slows down to a crawl. But I'm really excited about that. But I think eSIMs are a great thing to look into, and becoming kind of eSIM savvy is a good international travel tip.
And I like the fact that your source there is Global Yo. So
obviously,
everyone
high quality sources here on the EdTech Situation Room.
That's right. Okay, 2 quick podcasts to recommend. The first one is Apple in China. This is a series called Face Off, and it is absolutely fantastic. This particular episode, and that's the link on Apple Podcasts. You can get this on Spotify or Pocket Cast or whatever else. But it is really, really great deep dives. And this one, as I mentioned earlier in the show, talks specifically about Apple and the relationship that has changed with respect to the production of iPhones and the censorship of apps and just all of that that history that is affecting us contemporaneously as well. And then the next one, I could talk for 30 minutes about this, but I won't. This is the first in 3 podcasts that Ezra Klein of New York Times has done on artificial intelligence. And so this one, which is from April 2nd, and I missed this, but I've gone back to listen to it, is with Ethan Mollick. And Ethan Mollick, if you don't know him, Dr. Neiffer will tell you, I'm pretty sure you would agree with this, is the foremost higher education expert on artificial intelligence. He has a great Substack that we should all be subscribed to. He has a new book that's on my reading list. This is an absolutely fantastic discussion. It's called How Should I Be Using AI Right Now? It includes some really specific recommendations that, Mollick says, really, he thinks it's helpful to treat the AI as a sentient entity, and that coders are actually not, according to research, doing as well with these chat models as like teachers and regular folks who are engaging in chat, because they are designed not for scripting and coding, but to be able to decipher what you are going to input in a chat interface and then be able to discern and give you what it is that you want. There's just so many good things to say about this conversation. I found it really, really practical and helpful. I'm going to listen to it again, and it's also inspiring me to move forward with, I think, both virtual and then some face-to-face AI play dates, because I've participated in 4 so far. Every one of them has been great. I've learned good things, and it's just it's the most practical thing I can recommend to anyone who says, I'm so far behind with AI, what do I do? You need to play with the tools, and going to an AI play date where you're going to have folks that's a little more experienced than you playing with these tools, telling some stories about them, and then you'll have a chance to do it yourself, is exactly what all of us in education, certainly, but I would say in society just generally need to do, because there's no other way to really get your head around what these things can do and they can't do at this point. And then, sort of what are we going to do about it from here?
Absolutely.
All right. Where can folks find you, Dr. Neiffer, when you are not enlightening us with your articles from Global Yo?
Hey, well, you can find me at Global. Oh, that's different. I'm an AI centrist. Someday I'll finish that website, maybe on vacation. And you, sir?
I am at westfryer.com. This is our almost weekly, usually Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, EdTech Situation Room. You can find all of the links to our discussions at edtechsr.com/links. And most of our episodes, although we're behind from last week, you can also find on our website. We encourage you to subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook. We are not on the Bird site, but we are on Mastodon. And we hope that we've got 3 live viewers here finishing up. So if you are able to join us live, that's wonderful. And we encourage you to send any feedback that you have for the show, both live in chat or other ways that you can contact us. So until next time, we encourage you to stay savvy, stay safe, go play with AI in areas that you have expertise, and we'll see you next time on the EdTech Situation Room. Good night.
Good night.